story of Mira Dalton, a 21-year-old cafeteria worker who spent her days invisible to everyone around her. A young woman who carried a secret so profound that when it was finally revealed, it would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone in a 40-story corporate tower. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Mira wasn't the only one keeping secrets. In fact, every single person whose life she touched was hiding something too. Something that connected them all in ways they never could have imagined. You see, some secrets are meant to stay buried, but others are meant to heal the world. But to understand how one quiet moment could change everything, we need to go back to a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Every morning at 7:15 sharp, Mira Dalton would arrive at the Neuralink corporate building. She'd take the service elevator to the 42nd floor, tie her hair back, and begin her day the same way she had for the past 8 months. Wiping down tables, restocking napkins, making coffee for people who never looked her in the eye. But if you had watched closely that Tuesday morning, if you had really paid attention, you would have noticed something extraordinary, something that no one else saw. As Mira cleaned each table, her hands moved in strange, deliberate patterns. Her fingers danced through the air as if she were having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The other cafeteria workers had noticed it too, of course. They whispered about it sometimes. "That girl talks to herself," they'd say, moving her hand around like she's crazy or something. But they were wrong. Mira wasn't talking to herself. She was talking to Tommy. Tommy, her younger brother, who had been deaf since birth. Tommy, who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, just 2 weeks before his 18th birthday. Tommy, who had taught his big sister that communication wasn't about sound, it was about love. Every morning, as Mira worked, she would tell Tommy about her day using American Sign Language. She'd share the small moments, the observations, the feelings she couldn't express to anyone else. In her mind, Tommy was still there, still listening, still understanding her in ways that no one else ever had. What Mira didn't know was that someone else was watching too. Connor Rains, the 38-year-old CEO of Neuralink, had a habit that none of his employees knew about. Every Tuesday morning, he would stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 45th floor and watch the people below. He told himself it was market research, understanding his workforce, but the truth was simpler than that. Connor was lonely, and on this particular Tuesday morning, as he watched through the glass, something caught his attention. A young woman in the cafeteria was moving her hands in patterns that made his chest tighten with recognition. She was signing. Connor's fingers began to tremble. Without realizing it, his own hands started to move, mirroring gestures he hadn't used in 26 years. Gestures his father had taught him before everything changed. But Connor wasn't the only one who recognized what Mira was doing. In fact, there were others in that building who understood sign language, and each of them had their own reasons for keeping it secret. 3 floors below Connor's office, Hazel Finn was reviewing quarterly reports when she happened to glance toward the cafeteria. Hazel was Neuralink's executive assistant, known for her sharp efficiency and her ability to manage Connor's impossible schedule. She was also known for her cold professionalism with lower-level employees. But when Hazel saw Myra's hands moving in those familiar patterns, something cracked in her carefully constructed facade. Her breath caught. Her pen slipped from her fingers. She knew those gestures. She had learned them once, years ago, for someone she had loved desperately. Someone she had lost not to death, but to her own fear and pride. His name was Marcus, and he had been deaf. They had met in college, and for 2 beautiful years, Hazel had learned to communicate in ways she never thought possible. But when graduation came, when the real world beckoned with its demands and expectations, Hazel had made a choice she regretted every single day. She had chosen her career over love. She had chosen the hearing world over the one they had built together in silence. Marcus had signed to her one last time before he walked away. "You were never really listening anyway." Now, watching Mira, Hazel felt that old wound tear open again. And there was someone else watching too. Someone whose secret was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Dr. Theodore Levins, head of Neuralink's research division, was reviewing grant applications when his assistant knocked on his door. Dr. Levins, there's a situation in the cafeteria. One of the employees seems to be behaving strangely. Theo looked up, annoyed. He was 45 years old, had published over 200 research papers, and had no patience for workplace drama. What kind of situation? Well, she's talking to herself, with her hands. It's making some of the other workers uncomfortable. Theo's blood went cold. He stood up slowly, walked to his window, and looked down at the cafeteria. When he saw Mira signing, his knees nearly buckled. Because Theo knew exactly what she was doing. He knew because every night for the past 15 years, he had gone home to a daughter who communicated the same way. A daughter named Sophie, who had been born deaf, and who sent him videos every week that he watched but never knew how to answer. Theo had told himself for years that he didn't have time to learn sign language. He was too busy, too important, too focused on his research to learn what his own daughter needed from him. But the truth was simpler and more painful. Theo was terrified. Terrified that if he learned to really communicate with Sophie, she would see how much he had failed her. She would see how much he didn't know how to be the father she deserved. So instead, he had built walls. Professional walls. Academic walls. Walls made of research papers and scientific achievements, and the kind of success that looked impressive from the outside, but left you hollow within. But sometimes, the universe has a way of bringing hidden truths to light. And on this particular Tuesday morning, fate was about to intervene. At exactly 9:43 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and David Martinez stepped into the cafeteria. David was Neuralink's newest hire, a brilliant software engineer who happened to be deaf. He had been hired through the company's diversity initiative, and this was only his third day on the job. David was nervous. He had prepared for this moment, had practiced what he would do if he needed help, if he couldn't communicate with his hearing colleagues. But as he stood in the cafeteria, looking around at all the unfamiliar faces, panic began to set in. His phone was buzzing. Emergency calls from his mother, who was in the hospital. He needed to leave immediately, but he couldn't figure out how to explain the situation to anyone. The reception desk was empty. His supervisor was in meetings, and everyone around him was speaking in rapid conversations he couldn't follow. David began signing frantically, trying to get someone's attention, trying to communicate the urgency of his situation. But the other employees just stared at him with confusion, some backing away uncomfortably. That's when Mira looked up from the table. She was cleaning. She saw David's distress immediately. She saw the panic in his eyes, the urgency in his gestures. And without hesitation, she walked over to him and began to sign. "What's wrong?" her hands asked. "How can I help?" David's relief was immediate and overwhelming. Finally, someone who understood. Through rapid sign language, he explained about his mother, the hospital, the need to leave immediately. Mira nodded, then did something beautiful. She took out her phone, typed a quick message, and showed it to the nearest supervisor. "David has a family emergency and needs to leave right away. I'll help him get to HR to fill out the paperwork." As Mira guided David toward the elevator, something extraordinary happened. The entire cafeteria fell silent. Not because they understood what had just occurred, but because they had witnessed something rare and beautiful. Pure human connection. But what none of them knew was that this single moment of compassion was being watched from above, and it was about to change everything. Connor Rains stood at his window, his hands pressed against the glass, his heart pounding. He had just watched something that transported him back 26 years, to a small apartment where a gentle man with calloused hands had taught a 12-year-old boy that love didn't need sound to be heard. His father, William Rains, had been born deaf. He had worked construction his entire life, building other people's dreams while society looked past him as if he were invisible. But to Connor, his father had been everything. Patient teacher, wise counselor, and the strongest man he had ever known. William had insisted that Connor learn sign language fluently. "The world will try to tell you that people like me don't matter," his father had signed. But someday, son, you'll build a world where everyone's voice can be heard, where being different isn't being less. William had died suddenly when Connor was 12. A heart attack at the construction site. No warning, no goodbye, no chance for one last conversation. The last thing his father had ever signed to him was this: build bridges, son. Build bridges between worlds. Now, 26 years later, Connor had built an empire. Neuralink was worth billions. He employed thousands of people. He had achieved everything the world said mattered. But he had forgotten his father's real message. He had forgotten about building bridges. Until today. Until Mira. Connor made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew him. But first, he needed to know more about the young woman who had just reminded him of his father's dream. That evening, Connor did something he had never done in his 8 years as CEO. He accessed the employee database and pulled up Mira Dalton's file. 21 years old. Hired 8 months ago. Perfect attendance. Supervisor comments. Quiet. Reliable. Keeps to herself. Emergency contact. None listed. But it was the application form that made Connor's breath catch. Under special skills or languages, Mira had written, fluent in American Sign Language. And then, in smaller handwriting, she had added, experience caring for deaf family member. Connor closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of his office. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember. Not just his father's death, but his life. The way William would come home from work exhausted, but still make time to help Connor with homework. Their hands moving in the comfortable rhythm of sign language. The way his father would tell stories, his hands painting pictures in the air that were more vivid than any book. The way his father had dreamed of a world where his son would use his advantages to help people like him. The next morning, Connor made a decision that would puzzle his entire staff. I want to see Mira Dalton in my office, Connor told Hazel at 8 a.m. sharp. Hazel looked up from her computer, startled. The cafeteria worker? Sir, is there a problem? No problem. I just want to speak with her. Should I have HR present? If this is about yesterday's incident with the deaf employee. No HR. Just her. This morning, Hazel stared at her boss. In 5 years of working for Connor Rains, she had never seen him request a meeting with a lower-level employee. She had certainly never seen him look nervous about it. What Hazel didn't know was that Connor wasn't the only one who had been thinking about Mira all night. 3 floors down, Dr. Theo Levins was staring at his phone. On the screen was a video message from his daughter Sophie. She was 18 now, a freshman at Gallaudet University, and she sent him these videos every week. Always the same message. Hi, Dad. I love you. I hope you're doing well. I miss you. For 15 years, Theo had watched these messages and responded with typed texts. I love you too, Sophie. Study hard. I'm proud of you. But he had never signed back. He had never learned her language. Last night, watching Mira communicate so effortlessly with David, Theo had realized something that made him sick with shame. He had spent 15 years claiming he was too busy to learn sign language. But the truth was that he had learned Mandarin for a research project, French for a conference in Paris, and enough Spanish to give lectures in Mexico City. He could learn any language he wanted to. He had just never wanted to learn his daughter's. And in her small apartment across town, Mira was having a conversation that no one else could hear. Tommy, Mira signed to the empty room. Something's going to happen today. I can feel it. She was sitting on her bed, looking at a framed photo of a young man with kind eyes and a mischievous smile. Tommy had been 3 years younger than her, but he had always been the brave one, the one who made friends easily, who never let being deaf stop him from doing anything he wanted to do. Remember when you used to tell me that I was hiding? Mira continued signing. You said I was afraid to let people see who I really was. You said that helping people wasn't something to be ashamed of. The photo smiled back at her silently. I helped someone yesterday, Tommy. A man named David. He was scared, and I could help him, and for just a moment, I felt like you were proud of me. Mira wiped away a tear and stood up. She had to get ready for work. She had to face whatever was waiting for her. But when Mira arrived at Neuralink that morning, she discovered that everything had changed. Mrs. Evelyn Thompson, the 64-year-old cafeteria manager, was waiting for Mira at the employee entrance. Mrs. Evelyn had worked at Neuralink for 12 years, and in that time, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to know what was happening in her building before anyone else did. "Child," Mrs. Evelyn said softly, "you need to prepare yourself. Something big is about to happen." Mira looked confused. "Did I do something wrong yesterday? I know I wasn't supposed to leave my station, but David needed help, and—" "You didn't do anything wrong, honey. You did something right. Maybe the rightest thing that's happened in this building in years." Mrs. Evelyn had seen it all. She had watched Connor Raines transform from an idealistic young entrepreneur into a distant, driven CEO. She had watched Hazel Finn build walls around her heart after some mysterious heartbreak. She had watched Dr. Levins work longer and longer hours, as if he were running from something that followed him home every night. And she had watched Mira, this quiet girl who carried so much sadness, trying to heal her own heart by having conversations with a brother who lived now only in memory. "Mrs. Evelyn," Mira said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, child. Do you think it's wrong to keep talking to someone who's gone?" Mrs. Evelyn's eyes filled with understanding. "Honey, love doesn't die just because someone's not here to receive it anymore. Sometimes the most important conversations we have are with the people who live in our hearts." At exactly 10 a.m., Mira received a call that would change her life forever. "Mira Dalton, please report to the 45th floor. Executive Suite." Mira stared at the phone in disbelief. The 45th floor? That was where the CEO worked. That was where people like her never went. As she rode the elevator up, her hands began to move unconsciously, signing her anxiety to Tommy. "I think I'm in trouble. I think they're going to fire me. What did I do wrong?" But when the elevator doors opened, Connor Raines was standing there waiting for her. And when he saw her hands moving, he did something that took her breath away. He signed back. "You didn't do anything wrong," his hand said. "You did something beautiful." Myra's world tilted. The CEO of Neuralink knew sign language? How was that possible? What happened next would reveal secrets that had been buried for decades and change the lives of everyone in that building. Connor led Mira into his office, but they weren't alone. Hazel was there, looking uncomfortable. Dr. Levins sat in a chair by the window, his face unreadable. And to Myra's surprise, Mrs. Evelyn had been invited as well. "Mira," Connor began, his voice gentle, "I want to show you something." He turned on a large monitor and pulled up security footage from the day before. But it wasn't the footage of her helping David. Instead, it was compilation clips of Mira over the past several weeks, all showing the same thing. Her hands moving in sign language as she worked alone. Myra's face burned with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I know it looks strange. I can stop doing it. I didn't know anyone was watching." "Don't apologize," Connor said firmly. Then, to everyone's shock, he began to sign as he spoke. "I've been watching because I recognized what you were doing. My father was deaf." The room fell silent. Hazel stared at her boss in disbelief. In 5 years of working for him, she had never known this. Connor continued, his hands and voice working together. "When I saw you yesterday helping David, I realized something. My father once told me to build a world where everyone's voice could be heard. I built a company instead. I built success, but I forgot about the people." Dr. Levins shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There was something about this conversation that was hitting too close to home. "Mira," Connor said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Who were you talking to in those videos?" Myra's eyes filled with tears. She looked around the room at all these powerful people staring at her, and she felt more exposed than she had ever felt in her life. "My brother," she whispered. Then, louder, "My brother Tommy. He died 3 years ago. He was deaf, and I learned sign language to talk to him. After he died, I couldn't stop. I know it's crazy, but sometimes I feel like he's still listening." That's when something unexpected happened. Something that would shatter the careful facades that everyone in that room had been maintaining. Hazel suddenly stood up, her face flushed with emotion. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "You can't make corporate decisions based on someone's personal tragedy. This is a business, not a therapy session. Everyone turned to look at her, surprised by the harshness in her voice. Hazel, Connor began. No, Hazel's voice cracked. I won't sit here and watch you romanticize this situation. Do you want to know why I'm upset? Do you want to know why this bothers me so much? The room was dead silent. Because I learned sign language once too, for someone I loved. His name was Marcus, and he was the kindest, most intelligent man I've ever known. And I threw it all away because I was embarrassed. Because I was ashamed to be seen with someone who was different. Hazel's hands began to shake. He told me I never really learned to listen anyway. He was right. I learned the signs, but I never learned to see him. Really see him. She turned to Mira, her eyes blazing. So don't you dare think that learning a few gestures makes you special. Don't you dare think that you understand what it's like to really love someone and lose them because of your own cowardice. The room erupted in tension, but what happened next would reveal that everyone in that room was carrying secrets. Dr. Levins suddenly stood up, his face pale. Hazel, stop. No, Theo, I won't stop. Someone needs to say this. Someone needs to point out that this is all just corporate feel-good nonsense. Stop, Dr. Levins shouted, and everyone froze. In all the years they had known him, none of them had ever heard Theo Levins raise his voice. You want to talk about cowardice? Theo's voice was shaking. You want to talk about shame? I have a daughter. Her name is Sophie, and she's 18 years old, and she's been deaf since birth. For 18 years, she has sent me videos in sign language. For 18 years, I have responded with text messages because I was too proud, too busy, too important to learn her language. Dr. Levins pulled out his phone with trembling hands and showed them a video. A beautiful young woman signing, "Hi, Dad. I love you. I hope you're doing well. I miss you. She sends me these every week," Theo whispered. Every week. She tells me she loves me in a language I pretended I didn't have time to learn. But the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified that if I learned to really communicate with her, she would see what a failure I've been as a father. The room was charged with raw emotion, but the biggest revelation was yet to come. Connor walked to his desk and pulled out a framed photo that he usually kept face down. It showed a young boy with a tall, gentle-looking man, both of them signing to the camera. "This is my father, William Rains," Connor said quietly. "He died when I was 12, but before he died, he taught me that communication isn't about words. It's about connection. It's about seeing people for who they really are." Connor looked directly at Mira. "Yesterday, when I watched you help David, I saw something I had forgotten. I saw someone who understands that the most important conversations happen not when we speak, but when we truly listen." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "Mira, I didn't call you here to reprimand you. I called you here to offer you a job. A real job. I want you to help me build something my father dreamed of. A program that teaches people in this company how to really communicate. Not just with words, but with understanding." Mira stared at him in shock. "I don't understand. I'm just a cafeteria worker. I don't have any qualifications." "You have the most important qualification there is," Connor said. "You have heart. You have the ability to see people who others ignore. And you have something else." Connor's voice grew soft. "You know what it's like to love someone so much that you keep talking to them, even after they're gone." But just as it seemed like this story might have a happy ending, someone in the room wasn't ready for redemption. Hazel stood up abruptly, her face twisted with anger and pain. "This is insane. You're all insane. You think that sharing your sob stories makes this okay? You think that admitting your failures somehow absolves you?" She turned to Mira with venom in her voice. "And you think your dead brother would be proud of you for using his memory to manipulate people's emotions?" The words hit Mira like a physical blow. She gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Hazel, that's enough," Connor said firmly. "No, it's not enough." Hazel shouted. "Someone has to say it. This whole thing is a performance. Corporate theater designed to make us all feel better about our failures. Well, I won't participate. I won't pretend that good intentions erase years of neglect and selfishness." That's when the quietest person in the room spoke up with words that would change everything. Mrs. Evelyn had been sitting silently in the corner, but now she stood up slowly. At 64, she was the oldest person in the room, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of observation. "Child," she said to Hazel, "I've been working in this building for 12 years. I've seen all of you at your best and your worst. I've watched you build walls, make excuses, and hide from the very connections you're all desperately seeking." She walked over to Mira and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But I've also watched this young woman come to work every day for 8 months and pour her heart out to a brother who can't answer back. Not because she wants attention or sympathy, but because love doesn't know how to quit." Mrs. Evelyn turned to face the room. "You want to know what I see when I look at all of you? I see people who have forgotten that healing isn't about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to try again." Mrs. Evelyn's words hung in the air like a challenge. And slowly, one by one, the people in that room began to make choices that would define the rest of their lives. Dr. Levins was the first to move. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, and turned it to face himself. His hand was shaking as he began to sign. "Sophie," he said aloud as his hands moved, "this is your father. I'm sorry it took me 18 years to answer you properly. I love you too, and I miss you every day." He recorded the message and sent it. Then he looked up at the room with tears in his eyes. "That was the hardest and most important thing I've ever done." Connor nodded. "Mira, I meant what I said. I want to offer you a position as Director of Inclusive Communications. It would be your job to develop a program that teaches everyone in this company how to communicate across different abilities and backgrounds." Mira wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're the most qualified person I know," Connor said firmly, "because you understand something the rest of us forgot. Communication isn't about having the right degrees or the right title. It's about caring enough to meet people where they are." Hazel had been standing frozen by the window, but now she turned around slowly. Her face was streaked with tears, and her voice was barely a whisper. "I need to tell you all something," she said. "Marcus didn't leave me because I was embarrassed to be with him. He left because I broke up with him first. I told him that our relationship had no future because I couldn't imagine introducing a deaf boyfriend to my corporate colleagues." She took a shuddering breath. "I chose my career over love. I chose fitting in over standing out. And I've regretted it every single day for 10 years. Hazel looked directly at Mira. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said about your brother. I'm sorry for trying to tear down something beautiful because I'm angry at myself." That's when something extraordinary happened. Something that showed the true power of forgiveness. Mira stood up and walked over to Hazel. Without saying a word, she began to sign. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, and Connor translated for those who needed it. She's saying, "Pain recognizes pain. We've all made choices we regret. But maybe we can choose differently now." Hazel stared at Myra's hands, and slowly, her own hands began to move. The signs were rusty, imperfect, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." Connor felt something break open in his chest. "I have an idea. What if we don't just create a communication program? What if we create something bigger?" He walked to his whiteboard and began writing. "The William Raines Center for Inclusive Communication, named after my father. A place within NeuronLink where people can learn not just sign language, but all forms of communication. Where we teach empathy as a business skill. Where we show that including everyone doesn't just make us better people. It makes us a better company." Over the next several months, what had started as a simple conversation began to transform into something none of them had imagined possible. The William Raines Center became a reality faster than anyone expected. Mira, despite her protests about qualifications, proved to be a natural teacher and program developer. She created curriculum that went far beyond sign language to include communication techniques for people with autism, anxiety, different cultural backgrounds, and various learning styles. Dr. Levins threw himself into the project with the passion of a man making up for lost time. He developed assistive technologies and real-time translation software. But more importantly, he began having weekly video calls with Sophie, their conversations growing longer and more meaningful each week. Hazel surprised everyone by becoming the center's most dedicated volunteer. She spent her evenings and weekends helping to develop training materials and coordinate with other companies who wanted to implement similar programs. But the real miracle wasn't in the programs they built. It was in the connections they discovered. 6 months after that fateful meeting, Connor stood in the newly opened William Raines Center watching something that would have made his father proud. The space was full of Neuralink employees of all levels, all learning to communicate in new ways. In one corner, a group of executives were learning basic sign language from David Martinez, who had become the center's first deaf instructor. In another area, Mira was teaching a workshop on listening with your eyes to supervisors who wanted to better understand their nonverbal employees. But the scene that moved Connor most was happening by the window. Dr. Levins was on a video call with Sophie, their hands moving in animated conversation. Next to him, Hazel was practicing signs with a woman Connor didn't recognize. Connor walked over and Hazel introduced her companion with a shy smile. "Connor, I'd like you to meet Elena. She's an ASL interpreter at the courthouse, and she's been helping me remember everything I thought I'd forgotten." Elena smiled and signed. "Hazel told me about this place, about what you're all doing here. It's beautiful." As the months passed, the center's impact grew beyond anything they had imagined. The William Raines Center began attracting attention from across the country. Other companies sent representatives to learn about their programs. Universities asked Mira to speak at conferences. Dr. Levins received grant funding to expand his assistive technology research. But for Connor, the most meaningful moment came on a Tuesday morning exactly 1 year after he had first watched Mira signing in the cafeteria. He was standing at his office window when he saw her in the courtyard below. She was sitting on a bench with David, both of them signing rapidly, laughing at some shared joke. As Connor watched, Mira looked up at something in the sky and began to sign. Connor knew she was talking to Tommy, but this time, she wasn't signing sadness or loneliness. She was signing joy. She was telling her brother about her new life, her work, the people she was helping. She was telling him that his gift of teaching her to communicate had become a gift she was sharing with the world. That evening, Connor made a decision that would complete his father's dream. Connor called a company-wide meeting. As employees filed into the main auditorium, they found something unexpected. The entire presentation would be delivered in sign language, with voice interpretation for those who needed it. A year ago, Connor began, his hands and voice working together. "I thought communication was about being heard, but I learned something from a young woman who was talking to her deceased brother in our cafeteria. I learned that communication is about connection. It's about seeing each other fully. It's about building bridges between different worlds." He gestured to the screen behind him, which showed statistics. Productivity was up 34%, employee satisfaction had reached an all-time high, and turnover was at a 5-year low. "But those numbers don't tell the real story," Connor continued. "The real story is that we've learned to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. We've learned that diversity isn't just a policy initiative, it's a superpower." As Connor spoke, he noticed something beautiful happening in the audience. Throughout the auditorium, hearing employees were signing along with Connor's words, translating for deaf colleagues. People who 6 months ago couldn't spell hello in ASL were now having full conversations in multiple languages. But more than that, Connor could see something in their faces that hadn't been there before. Connection, understanding, the kind of belonging that his father had dreamed of but never lived to see. After the presentation, Connor found himself face to face with the person who had started it all. Mira approached Connor as the auditorium emptied. "I wanted to thank you," she signed and spoke simultaneously. "Thank me? Mira, you changed all of our lives." "No," she said with a smile. "We changed each other's lives." That's what Tommy always said communication was really about. Not one person talking and another listening, but both people changing because of the connection. Connor felt his father's presence then, as clearly as if William Raines were standing beside him. The old man would have loved Mira, would have appreciated her wisdom, would have been proud of the world his son had finally learned to build. 2 years later, the impact of that single moment of connection had rippled out in ways none of them could have predicted. The William Rain Center had become a model for corporate inclusion programs nationwide. Mira, now 23, had been featured on business magazine covers and accepted into a doctoral program in inclusive communication design. Dr. Levins had reconnected with his daughter Sophie, treasuring her Father's Day card that simply read, "Thank you for learning to listen." Hazel had become the center's coordinator and reconnected with Marcus as a friend and valued consultant. But perhaps the most beautiful change was one that happened quietly in moments no one else saw. Every morning, Mira still arrived at 7:15, but now she began each day in the center's meditation room, signing with Tommy. The conversations had changed from loneliness to gratitude. "Tommy," she would sign, "people are learning that seeing each other, really seeing each other, is the most important skill anyone can develop." Connor had started joining her for these morning conversations. The two of them bonded by understanding that the people we love continue their conversations through the lives we choose to live. Most touching was the tradition that emerged organically. Every Tuesday at 9:43 a.m., the entire building would pause for Connection Minute. For 60 seconds, everyone would engage in nonverbal communication, signing, writing notes, or simply making eye contact with a colleague they usually ignored. As we near the end of this story, there's one final scene that shows us the true power of choosing connection over isolation. That evening, the center hosted its second annual communication celebration. When Connor took the stage, behind him were photos of his father and Tommy, both signing "I love you" to the camera. 2 years ago, Connor began, his hands and voice working in harmony. "I thought I was running a technology company, but I learned something from a young woman brave enough to keep loving someone after they were gone. I learned that the most advanced technology in the world is the human heart." As he spoke, Connor could see faces throughout the crowd, employees who had learned to see each other as whole people, families who had bridged communication gaps, individuals who had discovered their differences made them valuable, not deficient. "We don't need to be perfect to be worthy of connection," Connor continued. "We just need to be willing to show up, to choose love over fear, inclusion over isolation, connection over convenience." And as the evening ended, one final moment showed how far they had all come. As the celebration wound down, Mira found herself in the courtyard where she used to sit alone. But tonight, she wasn't alone. David was there with his family, Dr. Levins with Sophie, Hazel with Elena and Marcus, Mrs. Evelyn with her family, and Connor, no longer the isolated CEO, but a man who had learned that true leadership meant creating space for everyone to belong. As Mira looked around at all these connections that had grown from a single moment of choosing compassion, she began to sign. "Tommy," her hand said to the stars, "I think we did it. We built the world you dreamed of. A world where being different isn't being less. A world where love doesn't end just because someone can't answer back. And if you listen carefully, you might hear something beautiful. You might hear the quiet truth that Tommy and William and every overlooked person knew all along. We don't just need to know how to speak. We need to know how to listen. With our eyes, with our hands, with our willingness to believe that every human being has something valuable to say, even when they say it in silence, especially when they say it in silence. Because sometimes the most profound conversations happen without words. And sometimes the most powerful way to honor the people we've lost is to spend our lives learning to see the people who are still here. That's the gift Mira gave to everyone she met. That's the bridge Connor finally learned to build. That's the legacy of love that continues to ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. The conversation continues, and it's beautiful.